This is part 4 of my series about posture for guitarists. Each video builds on ideas covered in previous videos, so it's best if you've already watched them. The links are in the description below. I've already received criticism for my views on this subject, and that was before I went fully public, so now I await a deluge of hate mail and death threats. Maybe feathers will be ruffled because I'm flying in the face of tradition, and maybe, just maybe, the title of this video is shameless clickbait, but hopefully it will explain why my PhD research led me to this viewpoint. In this video I'll be looking at the classical guitarist's footstool and why I believe you should never use one. Of course, if you want to use one, go ahead. It's your body, you can do whatever you want with it. Just don't come running to me when you're crippled by the pain of herniating spinal discs. Once the spine is injured, playing an instrument becomes very difficult, as do most daily activities. Therefore, symmetry is something guitarists should pay attention to.
I think posture is so important, don't you?
And this video will explain why. Surveys of injury amongst amateur, student and professional musicians reveal that neck and back pain is one of the most common complaints for guitarists across pop, classical and flamenco styles. If you've paid attention to this series, you should know that the takeaway message from all this is everything should be balanced on top of something else so that posture can be maintained with little muscular effort. Symmetry is beauty because non-symmetrical postures shift the centre of gravity and necessitate tension. Stay mobile and relaxed. There's a lot we don't know about the body. We don't know why some people can play for years without ever having an injury while others have lots of problems. Perhaps they have the perfect spine or slightly different fibre types in their tendons, we may never know. These videos are for the rest of us who might not have perfect physiology and want to err on the side of caution instead of going with the flow and seeing how things turn out in a few decades' time. After all, just because Elvita Adams survived jumping from the 86th floor of the Empire State Building doesn't mean everyone should try it. A danger for guitarists is that they'll adopt whatever position puts their hands where they can reach the notes and their head wherever allows them to see their fingers, but they're so intensely focused on the difficulties of making music they don't notice how awkward it is for the back and therefore the whole body. Thus, they get used to the posture and think it's all fine and relaxed, when in fact it's the exact opposite. What makes this worse is that these postures become habits and carry over into the rest of life. Some physical therapists can even accurately guess a player's instrument without being told, just on the basis of body posture. In his book, The Physiology of Guitar Playing, Isnella lists the top 3 causes of musicians' injuries as being force, repetition and bad posture. There are actually a lot of risk factors and putting them in order is difficult. But remember that last point about bad posture because, this is a video about posture. If we look at this picture of a guitarist using a footstool, you can see that his torso and hips are rotated in different directions, causing the vertebral bones to tilt as well as twist. This puts pressure on one side of the intervertebral discs instead of spreading it evenly over the whole surface. The ribs must bend to account for the rotation, putting shearing forces on the sternum and restricting the lungs. Adding some reference lines makes it easier to see that he is leaning to the left and one shoulder is lower than the other, which shifts the centre of gravity from the spine's axis. Consistent positioning of one side of the rib cage closer to the opposite hip is a red flag for problems in the spiral line. Common postural compensation patterns associated with spiral line problems include ankle pronation or supination, knee rotation, pelvic rotation relative to the feet, rib rotation relative to the pelvis, one shoulder lifted or tilted forwards, and head tilt or rotation. In my interview with John Mills, he talks about how leaning to one side while playing over several decades caused 2 of his spinal discs to herniate. He also mentions that the spine specialist he saw said it's a common problem in people with lopsided posture. Joints are happiest in their mid-range of motion. David Leisner, in his book Playing with Ease, points out that the footstool requires the hip and knee joints to be held away from their mid-range, mentioning that they aren't in their optimum positions.
The knee though, well that's like, sort of like miles away, who cares?
Yeah, I don't really have a good response to that, except that it probably puts unequal stretches on myofascial continuities, but more on those later. Anyway, I do have plenty of things to say about the hips. One foot is raised significantly higher than the other, and this causes three problems. Firstly, remember that sitting with the knees at hip height requires a lot of tension to stop the lower back rounding out. So raising one leg even higher needs even more tension. Secondly, raising one leg higher than the other or dropping one leg tilts the pelvis diagonally, putting a kink in the lower spine. The same thing happens to a lesser extent when you sit with one leg crossed over the other. Thirdly, there is an uneven pull on various myofascial continuities. Here you can see the two anterior spiral lines that wrap around the torso and legs in rather confusing ways. The asymmetrical foot position of this guitarist puts different amounts of drag on one spiral line to the other. Eventually these lines will adapt to these differing forces by changing their lengths, and this will make it hard to achieve a good posture even when not playing the guitar. Now you might be wondering whom this guitarist is that I've picked on so viciously. Can you guess? Shout it out if you think you know the answer. It's Mr. Esniola. Here are some other pictures of guitarists using the footstool to show that footstools and awkward posture go hand in hand, so to speak. Maybe these adaptations can be offset by regular stretching, but if you used a more neutral posture, you'd have less corrective work to do after every practice session. Despite recommendations from posture experts who don't play the guitar that we always adopt a neutral, symmetrical spine position, the footstool is advocated or even recommended by articles written by guitarists who claim physiological knowledge. Let's do a quick recap to the pros and cons of using a footstool, and maybe that will tell us why. The footstool's disadvantages are increased tension required in the lower spine, sideways curve of the spine is loaded at angles to its axis, so there's increased risk of disc herniations, slow adaptations in connective tissues can cause long-term pain problems. It doesn't allow the feet to equally share the task of stabilising the body because they aren't symmetrically aligned, and because folding footstools can't support much weight. And people tend to lean forwards or sideways so the spine isn't perpendicular to gravity. Contact between the edge of the instrument and the thigh dampens the sound slightly. The instrument is not very stable, requiring 4 contact points to keep its position. And footstools don't fit in classical guitar cases. Given all of these problems, why do so many people recommend the footstool? They've been paid off by the footstool manufacturers. Of course they haven't. Let's list the footstool's advantages, maybe that will explain it. Out of all of the contraptions available to help position the guitar, footstools are the cheapest option. In my interview with Gerald Harsher, he explained that playing with a footstool is fine because it's still possible to get a lot of movement in this position, provided the body is moving in a relaxed way. While rigidity certainly causes problems, I have 2 responses to this. It's been known for some time that having legs of different lengths causes all kinds of problems, from back pain to fatigue. This is called short leg syndrome. The earliest mention I could find is from 1950. I don't know if it goes back earlier than that, but you may have heard of people having a special shoe with a thicker sole or a raised heel to counteract the discrepancy. A difference of 3/4 of an inch, that's about 2 centimetres, is enough to require treatment. There are 2 types of short leg syndrome: congenital, meaning you're born with it, and acquired, meaning that you only appear to have one shorter leg. This could be due to various factors, one of which is bad posture, such as having a tilted pelvis. Since anything we do regularly and or for long periods of time becomes habitual, using a footstool could cause acquired short leg syndrome.
I'm too sexy for my shirt, so sexy. It hurts.
Maybe he's born with it.
But my dear chap, look here. We are not standing.
True, but sitting with one raised leg tilts the pelvis and puts a kink in the lower spine.
But Michael, short leg syndrome's a problem because people are walking around with uneven gait. We're just sitting still.
Well, no, because people justify using the footstool by saying we can and should move around. I literally said that 90 seconds ago. Pay attention. There are better positions for mobility. How much easier is it to move when both knees are at hip height and there's less tension in the lower back? Or even when standing. I feel quite mobile when I'm standing. According to Isniola, it is not surprising that many guitarists that use this sitting position end up with lower back pain problems, sometimes of a paralysing intensity. Yet he still claims that it isn't the footstool that's the problem, but how it's used, which might be like saying footstools don't hurt people. People hurt people. Isniola also claims that since the footstool is still the norm for many guitarists, we must deal with the problems its use presents, which is like hitting yourself on the head with a mallet, but less forcefully.
It's being hit on the head lessons in here.
What a stupid concept!
Incidentally, his book doesn't recommend any methods for dealing with those problems. Let's be clear. I'm not saying that getting rid of the footstool and using a different device is an instant fix-all cure for bad posture and inappropriate tension. It's all too easy to bring your bad habits to whatever you sit on or whatever you use to position the guitar. This can be seen when a long-term footstool user is given an A-frame instead, like in this picture of... Yes, once again I'm picking on Mr. Isniola. You can see that his right leg is pulled to the right because it is accustomed to being there. This tells us that his hips are probably rotated at a different angle to his chest, since it's more difficult to only move one leg to the side. I've seen plenty of ergonomic device users leaning far to the left, and I did the same when I first made the switch. To finish, I'll leave you with this little morsel. To my knowledge, there's only been one specific study looking at the effects of asymmetrical postures on musicians. This whole health of performing artists field is still very new. This study showed that music teachers with an asymmetric playing posture had significantly more muscle disorders than those with a symmetrical posture. I hope you found this interesting. In the next video, I'll be looking at the problems of playing like this.